Welcome to the Mighty Mentality Mentor podcast. I'm your host, and LOG. Last time we went over the MSR feedback loop, and that was actually our first introduction to the MSR feedback loop. And we briefly talked about some top-down MSR and bottom-up MSR aspects, and I'm gonna actually end up changing that because we've made some continuous improvement, guys. The MSR feedback loop is no longer a top-down, bottom-up model. It's now actually a little bit more circular in its approach, and we will be going over that next episode. But again, just going over a quick recap. Again, we went over the MSR feedback loop. We went over the top-down and the bottom-up. And then we briefly, at the end of it all, just started to touch on the Renaissance Man. And I want you to focus in on the MSR feedback loop and the Renaissance Man, the whole idea of being the designer of your own skill sets. That's going to come in handy. It's going to be key. And it's actually going to be very, very much central in all of our future discussions, topics, and insights, I would say, actually, as well. Now, for this episode, we are going to start moving in on fears, because from the beginning, where you decide that you want to take something on, you have the intent to take something on, and that's where, again, the arrival fallacy and the impact bias comes into play. Again, you've got your MSR feedback loop. We really have to start talking about the MSR feedback loop, because that, again, is going to come into play for fear. Once you've decided that you want to take something on, naturally, you're going to get some feelings of fear, whether or not that would be, a little bit of fear of failure, fear of change, some common fears in essence, or maybe even a lack of self-esteem. Once we start to kind of go over all of that, sometimes our fear can manifest itself in other ways, and we're going to spend a lot of time next month talking about analysis paralysis. After one can champion the analysis paralysis and sort of the general fears of everything, then usually what happens is people start to develop a little bit of an ownership mentality, because they understand now, I can control this. This is something that is actually in my hands with respect to governing where we're going to end up going. And then naturally at that point, we start to define success. We start, once we've defined success, start getting into planning, goal setting, and then eventually execution. Execution obviously is necessary in order to achieve what we feel is success. And so that's huge as well, because, depending on the arena that you may be operating in, success can mean very, very different things. From there, we move into continued success, because it's easier to get the championship than it is to actually keep the championship. And so there are several aspects of the entire game of getting to and from where you're at right now to the ideal state. There are many aspects to ensuring continued success versus short-term success. So, we'll be talking about that, hiccups along the road, and then of course sharing success. So that's going to be our 2024. We've kind of outlined the entire 2024, and right now we're moving into the fear, call it module, if you would. Now, the top 5 fears that get in the way of us starting a journey toward a goal would be fear of failure. Usually not as bad as we thought it would be in our heads, right? Any example of when you think of a scenario as much worse than what actually happens in real life once you actually do that. There's fear of change, depending on when previous situations have happened, or how they've happened. There may be a heavy burden during that last situation that involved change. And then the stress of thinking of it, maybe a little bit of a detractor for you. There's fear of rejection, of course, where rejection from the ones who told you not to proceed, a little bit of I told you so. Fear of success. We sometimes worry about the responsibilities that are going to be bestowed upon us, should we succeed. And in doing so, we kind of forget that version of you today is not the same version of you succeeding. The version of you succeeding is a version that can withstand pressure. You're going to end up growing in situations. Situations in life are very much like video games and Mario levels. Specifically, there's always that one level that, it would make things much easier if I had the little feather and I had the raccoon tail and I'd be able to fly the whole time. Or even that magic wing P, that thing that lets you kind of fly the entire level. Well, there's some levels out there that you can't, it's so difficult, but if you had the unlimited flying, then it just makes that entire level a breeze. And so these are the sorts of levels that I think about, applying a certain tactic or having a certain attribute that facilitates success in a particular arena is not a bad thing. Okay? Any Mario level that has no ground is immediately easier if you have the raccoon tail or you can fly. And that same thought process can be applied. And then lastly, fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown is a visceral fear that dates back to the caveman era. There's if you were not scared or at least cautious to enter a dark cave, you might have been the one guy that entered that dark cave to meet a whole pride of lions. And then, I suppose unless you ended up having children before that moment, probably the next moments are not going to be that good for you, one, and then also two, they're probably not going to facilitate the future of your genes. Just saying. Right? Another thing would be lack of self-esteem. We briefly talked about that along with some of the common fears that we may have. And so, lack of self-esteem, that can easily be tied to, results or lack of. So this is where we tie it to the MSR feedback loop, because in the MSR feedback loop that we talked about last episode, it was just a top-down, bottom-up approach. But with this, call it evolution of the MSR feedback loop, you can see that now there is a connection between mindset and results. And that's big, because if we look at the bridge between mindset and results, you'll see that lack of self-esteem lives there. If we have a lack of results, i.e., hey, I've never done anything like this before, your remedy is going to be an increase in skill set. How can you be more confident in something that you've never done before if you don't feel the confidence to proceed your first time or second time or what have you? You have to have an increase in skill set. If you have an increase in skill set, then at that point you will have had enough practice runs where the prize and the punishment, for lack of a better term, isn't as high. Call it a sparring match as compared to a competition. That is the remedy. Increase in skill set so that you can as a result of you not as a result of you not having enough results, an increase in skill set will get you more confidence. And then tying it to the mindset, a lacking in belief in oneself, it's not a skill set that I've previously been able to take on. However, in the past, even though you may have not been able to take things on, things may have changed. You may have taken on other things since that have enabled you to become a stronger person, right? Previous examples of skill set additions since the last time an attempt was made. You know, if we failed last time, but since the failure we learned more skills, maybe those skills that we learned since the last failure have changed us in a way that allows us to be more able to take on the new skill set addition. For example, you know, a person wanting to learn how to play piano may feel like it's tall order, but after spending some time learning the fundamentals of music theory, a second attempt at learning the piano will be much, much easier. As an example, knowing that you can either operate in A minor or C major, now I can only operate while using only the white keys. That gives me a little bit of structure to be able to operate within, that enables me to actually make sound good. I know that as long as I can hit all the white keys, it'll sound good, because we're actually operating within what's called a key signature. Let's not get into all of those details. It's just the point that I'm trying to make is, with a little bit more of a know-how or experience in something that, you know, may have nothing to do with what you're trying to take on, that might change you. Okay? So that's it's kind of where we want to move things towards. Another item that is, I would say that this is something that's not just for folks that are just starting. You know, this is something that affects even the great folks, is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, or also known as imposter phenomenon, is a psychological occurrence in which people doubt their skills, talents, or accomplishments and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as frauds. And I want to highlight this because, again, this is not something that just happens to people that are beginning their journey in whatever arena they may be operating within. This happens to folks that are well in their journey, well after massive success. You know, I've got one person here, Maya Angelou, where, you know, I quote Maya Angelou. She says, "I have written 11 books, but each time I think, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out." End quote. You've got Mike Myers. I quote, "I still believe that at any time the no talent police will come and arrest me." This is Mike Myers we're talking about. Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt talked about the man in the arena, and I'm gonna spend some time talking about that right now. I want to quote this because this is so important. This is, in my opinion, how you can start to sort of be easier on yourself when it comes to your trajectory, because sometimes you know, we can think that we're imposters because of the speed or the rate with which we're getting better or progressing within the arena that we are operating within, or domain. And so we have to sometimes be easy on ourselves and give ourselves some grace to be able to understand that you'll receive your benefits or your gains at whatever rate that you're in, but as long as you're in the arena, you're what counts. And so I quote Teddy Roosevelt, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And that's huge. Again, you may be marred with dust and sweat and blood, but you're the one that's out there. And whatever pace that you may be on, it doesn't matter what anybody else says. You are moving in on your pace. You are not an imposter. You are the one in the arena. So let's leave it at that for now. Next episode, we're going to touch on the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it really ties into imposter syndrome. And we're going to spend a little bit more time on the MSR feedback loop, right? But in summary, the fear that we feel with regard to our goals come in different shapes and sizes, and we need to be able to understand each to begin to overcome it, and realizing that a lack of results can be overshadowed by adequate skill sets. It doesn't matter if you've never done it in the big stage. If you have practiced enough, and the practice needs to be congruent with the real thing, but if you've practiced enough, you will be okay. The results will follow. Okay? So, again, thank you for tuning in. Give us a follow here on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Mighty Mentality Mentor, on Facebook at mighty.mentality.mentor, and on X at Mighty Mentality. Thanks again for watching.